Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. We reap what we teach. And I'm extremely grateful because before me, J.D. Lakshmanarayan sir and Shreya ji, because you've given me a very good segue into what I'm going to talk about, which is the fundamental knowledge system that this civilization has harked on for over 5 millennia. All the things that we spoke about, the family, the guru, the temple, the socio-cultural milieu, the emphasis on all-round integral well-being, all of that is part of the Indian culture, has always been part of the Indian civilization. If we are talking about a civilization, it essentially means that there was a way to produce knowledge and there were means to transmit that knowledge. And for some reason, and the reasons are obvious to us, for some reason in post-independent India, the education did not really represent the civilizational wisdom of this land. And if you were to, just imagine 400 years ago, Sir spoke about the lived values and tradition. But if you were to just imagine sitting here 400 years ago, every single person born in any society, not just in India, anywhere you're born, you download a cultural package. You become part of the values and the cultural systems and cultural mores of that land. These cultural systems were passed on through your Jati Kula system. They had an integral system of learning from your elders. About 400 years ago, when the world moved into a formal education system, it got linked to the industry and it decoupled the entire learning milieu that people had. So we're talking about Indian knowledge systems for global futures. And we begin with what Sri Aurobindo and Mother had so famously given us as the vision for education. There are analytical cultures, there are knowing cultures, and there are being and becoming cultures. True knowledge is not attained by thinking, it is what you are, it is what you become. This is a seminal observation about education because in India, the education is not about a chasm between who you know and what you are. If behavior is not asymptomatic, if your knowledge is not translating into behavior, that's not considered to be education. So why do we need to talk about a new knowledge system? Because there is a complex changing world. There are new ideas around civilization, ethics, worldview that is entering the people's minds and vocabulary today. And how do you do this? You do this by multidisciplinary education focused on the learner. I think there have been a couple of iterations of this crisis, both in J.D. Sir's speech and Shreya ji's speech, that there is an identity crisis. And we need to dig a little deeper into this. Seeking identity and wanting to belong is a fundamental human need. And this human need is captured by technology and how communication is reshaped by technology. If you look at culture today and a lot of cultural wars that are happening about cancelling, about identity, is because there is a pervasive systemic conflict. Every child and every adult wants to seek an identity and they want to belong to a certain group. I come from game development, and game development technology is actually the pioneer in creating tribes and in creating communities where you really belong strongly. That's why we hear so much of gamification in education. Now this desire to belong is hijacked by political ideologies. If I want to belong to a group, there is an easy way for me to become a right or a left or some kind of political identity that I can take today. And when you take the political identity and combine that with social media technology, you're also constantly expressing your identity. The minute you express your identity, you are beholden to the image that you've created of yourself. And when that image is non-integral self and it is compounded by social media, you begin to have culture wars. And therefore, the crisis in education today is actually a crisis in culture. And why is that? It's because there is an inherent link between culture and education. If the culture is teaching rights, you cannot have dharma as part of education. So we have to look at this together. And there is a great new book by Jonathan Haidt. It's called The Anxious Generation. Highly recommend it for all educators. In fact, both in Australia, United Kingdom and United States, there have been recent policies, very, very critical policies on education that have been guided by the research from this book. Significant increase in mood disorders in US colleges. Depression, 134% increase. Anxiety has increased by 106%. Shift from play-based school to phone-based childhood. Increased feelings of loneliness, negative social comparison, and decline of real-world resilience. All of these things are presented as research. And there was a research also done in asking young people what are the adjectives that come to their mind when they are asked about social media. So they said words like draining, fake, toxic, connection, engagement, mental health, doom scrolling, dangerous freedom. All of these are now entering the popular lexicon because there is an addiction to screen. The phone-based education has actually replaced the play-based education, and that means that all of us, and this is, this is where understanding design and technology also becomes critical for educators. When you are, let's say, sitting in your drawing room and you're watching TV, you have a peripheral vision. From a design perspective, you're looking at the screen, but you're also making sense of what's happening around you. So this is called a lean forward experience. In design language, you lean forward and see this. But a phone actually really arrests all your peripheral vision. This is a lean back experience. The minute you lean back, it means that all of your peripheral vision is cut out. It also means that the burden of actually responding morally is entirely on you. In a drawing room, when you have peripheral vision, when you have people moving about, you are very conscious of what you are consuming. You would suddenly flip the channel if something is not right. There is that social context that is inherently cognitively registered. But in a phone-based education system, when you lean back, you don't have that. It means that the entire burden of a moral choice, an ethical choice, is on the child. It's not, the social link is disconnected. So when you look at this, you don't have the habit formation of making socially and contextually relevant choices. You cannot suddenly become moral. It is a practiced art. It is learnt by socialization. It is only when you interact as a society, like Sir said, when you move around in society, you understand different social contexts, and that shapes your ethical worldview. Today, if we are saying that people are not able to mix and gel with the society, it means that at a fundamental cognitive level, that diversity is not registering. It's because I am in a lean back experience mode. So this design of technology is also a crisis of philosophy in design. It's a crisis of philosophy in education. And we have the results very clearly with us. In USA, the growth in administrative staff, principals, teachers, and students has exponentially shot up, and the education results have come down. As part of this research that has come out of this book, The Anxious Generation, there is now a movement in Australia to ban social media and phones up to 15 years for school children. It's also been passed in 2 states in United States and 1 county in United Kingdom. So culture and the idea of self impacts education and impacts how the integral development of the child is even conceptualized. So in Indian tradition, all of us have been talking about problems, but does Indian civilization have a different way of developing potential? Clearly, if you are calling ourselves a civilization, it means that we had the ability to produce knowledge and we had institutions to transmit that knowledge. If we regard man as a physical entity, our approach to education would be of one kind. If you regard man as a mental being alone, your approach is a different one. But only if we regard man as a spiritual being, your formulations are bound to be different. So this problem is not a problem of technology, it's not a problem of resources, it's not a problem of infrastructure. It is fundamentally a problem of worldview and the metaphysics that guides the worldview. Unless we reshape the thinking about the self, which is where this civilization begins. Sakshatkara is also Atma Sakshatkara. It begins with Atma. This was an Atma-centric civilization. So if you look at this, what is the Indian theory of education? The core 4 of the Indian education are Swabhava. What is the Swa? Who am I? Am I just a material being? Am I just a physical being? Am I just an intellectual being? Am I just a social being? Or am I something more deeper at myself? And this question has been answered decisively in the Indian civilization. The entire blueprint of education for us was the alignment of Swabhava with Swadharma. If you look at Ayurveda, you get the idea of Tridosha. If you look at yoga, you get the idea of Sattva, Rajas, Tamas. If you look at Vedanta, you get the idea of Brahman. This idea of self and understanding yourself before you understand the world is deeply ingrained in this civilization. So the alignment of who I am and what is my dharma is the basis for a sustainable education model. And when you have that, you also have Swabhimana. You understand what is self-respect, self-esteem, and through that you have what the late K.C. Bhattacharya ji said, Swaraj in ideas. The idea of a critical reserve, where you are anchored in your civilization and the world is presenting to you multiple ideas and multiple worldviews, but you're able to reflect on them critically from your anchor, and you take what is necessary, reject what does not fit. This is the purpose of education. Today, when learning and knowledge has already been decoupled and democratized, what we need to develop is the critical ability for people to understand what is good and what is not. And that is basically a function of Swabhava and Swadharma. So in the Indian knowledge system tradition, this is now part of the new education policy as well. Indian knowledge corpus is basically the civilizational grand inheritance that all of us have. It comes to us from religions, it comes to us from art, it comes to us from lok, from the lived realities. We can also conceptualize Indian knowledge systems as the knowledge system of the city, the Nagara, in this civilization. It's also the knowledge system of the Grama, of the village. It is also the knowledge system of the Vana, the tribal knowledge systems. So the Indian knowledge system, the paradigm of Indian knowledge system is a grand fusion, a grand cultural complex of the Vedic, the Buddhist, the Jaina, the Sikh, the tribal, the folk, all of these knowledge systems which have interacted with each other creatively for over 5,000 years. Unless we rediscover the basis for education and human growth in our own knowledge system, no amount of technology can solve the crisis that we are in. So if you look at it, in the Indian knowledge system, there is something called Chaturdasha Vidyasthana, the 14 disciplines. And there is a whole science, a most intricate science of developing both the intuitive mind and also the analytical mind. In fact, it is the intuition that then rises your ability to analyze. And if you look at the intelligences, Shreya ji spoke about physical intelligence and emotional intelligence. If you look at a true education in the Indian model, you have fundamental texts and practices and pedagogies which develop in Natya Shastra, the world's most ancient theory of poetics. It develops the aesthetic intelligence. What is beauty? How to speak? How to actually approach? How to stand? How to sit? All of this has been theorized and practiced. This is what gives you 64 art forms in this country. If you look at Yoga Sutras, the world's greatest text and theory and practice of understanding your mind, all of emotional intelligence is downstream of psychological intelligence. To understand the architecture of yourself, Yoga Sutra is the grandest theory of the mind even today. Then you have the idea of Tarka Shastra, logical intelligence. How do you argue? The whole tradition of Purva Paksha. How do you understand what is the opponent point of view, respect it, and then mount your response on top of that from an understanding, not a dismissal. This is Tarka Shastra. Then you have the whole idea of linguistic intelligence, which is comes to us from Ashtadhyayi Dhatupat. If you look at a single word in Sanskrit, you can generate an entire worldview from that. I'll give you a simple example. How many of us would have seen a prompt when we make a payment through Paytm? In English, it says received, 50 rupees received. But in Hindi or Telugu, it says 50 rupaye prapt huve. All of us must have heard it. Praptam in Telugu, is a wholly different metaphysics and worldview. Praptam is not a transaction. Praptam is my worthiness. It's a karmic exchange. I have to do something for me to get that. So the shopkeeper has fulfilled his dharma, and therefore he got the praptam of getting that 50 rupees. The language that you spoke about, sir, is not just about creativity, but it's fundamental worldview building itself. And this is what Indian knowledge system gives us. We need a different paradigm of education that is grounded in this civilization for an integral growth of the child. And if you look at the national education policy, it made it mandatory. 5% of all curriculum, which is where we work. I start an organization called Brihat, and we are into Indian knowledge systems for higher education and also partnering with schools. 5% of all curriculum now is mandated by UGC to be IKS based. There are 9 IITs which have IKS centers. There are 23 universities which have IKS departments. All of this is happening in the last 2-3 years, and this will percolate down to schools. So there is a grand movement, a paradigm shift of education in India, and this will move to what we call the Panchakosha model of education. It is, when we say man is a spiritual being, it means that there is a fundamental Ananda-centric civilizational view. It is not just physical, emotional, but there is a deeper spiritual layer. The Anandamaya Kosha, which is the sacred core, which then also intersects with the Vijnanamaya Kosha, which is the intellectual, philosophical core. Then the Manomaya, the ability to enjoy aesthetic bliss, the ability to have creative satisfaction, that is also nurtured in this education system. Then you have the vital. So the whole idea of responsibility is not just atomic habits. it is also breath. It is also what considers, what moves in your life as prana. And then you have Annamaya. Annamaya Kosha is just the outer layer of the ability to know what you're eating and how it affects your mood. But then there is a whole breath work, there is a cultural work, there is a knowledge work, and there is a sacred work. So we need an education system that does not just work on ahamkara, it goes into buddhi, manas, ultimately chitta. Education in the Indian knowledge paradigm is chitta shuddhi. This is the word that we have in all Indian languages. And anything that comes out of a shuddhi chitta is also shubham, it's also mangalam. So if you want to produce children who will bring auspiciousness into society, then the process is cleansing of the chitta. And the 5 koshas and their meaning, this is available to us. And in terms of pedagogy, while this, this is philosophy, how did the civilization teach it? Sir said, begin with a story. There are extraordinary pedagogical methods in this civilization that teach with stories. In fact, Mahabharata says there are 4 quadrants of learning. The first 25% of learning is Swadhyaya. It is what you learn by yourself, by listening. The next 25% is actually by the teacher. You also learn from Guru. The next 25% is the group learning, the peer-to-peer learning. And the last 25%, which is distinct to Indian system, is Kala Kramena. Whatever you do, life has to also give you experience for knowledge to become behavior. Otherwise, it is just information. And in this civilization, if you are knowledgeable and if your behavior is not according to that knowledge, you are not respected. That is why it's Acharya. Acharya is somebody who is putting that into Acharan. And if you start looking at education from the Indian languages, we get the vision of education. Acharya is basically not knowledge. It is also Acharan of that knowledge. And the pedagogical methods, there are many. There is enigmatic, aphoristic. With one sutra, the entire civilizational worldview is decoded. You have the synthetic method, the analogical method, the comparative method. There are many of these methods that are available. But fundamentally, the 3 institutions that have governed education in India, sir has already spoken. It is family, the guru, and the kshetra. This is a land that has sacralized space. It has made sure that wherever you go, there is a transformation of consciousness happening. When time is sacralized, it becomes muhurta. When space is sacralized, it becomes kshetra. So this education system was always about sacralizing to transform consciousness. And that is the idea of dharma, which is a balance between yoga, which is union with a higher self, and bhoga, which is interacting with the world. And all of this is available to us as our inheritance, our collective inheritance. So in my organization, we've given ourselves a mission that in the next 15 years, no child in India should leave education without being acquainted to our fundamental civilizational knowledge systems. Because this is the fundamental intelligences that we can give to our children. Aesthetic, psychological, socio-emotional, cultural, and spiritual intelligence. Giving that to a child is education in the Indian knowledge systems. We now have a policy. We now have parents showing interest. We have educators coming together. We now have an ecosystem that can support educators who want to take a new paradigm which is our own. Thank you.